Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I regret visiting that dark web forum, Part 3. It's been a couple of days since I was last able to post. There's a reason for that. Much of the news is dominated by what happened to the building where my former workplace was located. And it's little wonder. The New York metro area hasn't seen that kind of loss of life since the events of 9/11. The death toll is already in the hundreds, and people are pretty sure that the final death toll will be in the thousands. Nicola and I have other things to worry about though. The man who got us out of our office building led us to the Grand Central Terminal. As he was doing so, Nicola asked about her belongings and her house in New Jersey. And both of us were told that people were already dispatched to handle that. Of course, that confused us, and then made me nervous because neither of us knew what that meant. "Your house is under armed guard, is what I mean," he clarified. "Your house is being secured as well, Sophia." I shivered. It was like he read my mind. He wasn't even looking in my direction when I was thinking that. I pushed that thought away though. I had more pressing matters to worry about. "What's your name?" I asked. "Call me Clint. Right now, we're headed to Sophia's house to regroup and then debrief both of you." After that, Clint didn't say much else, and there was no way Nicola and I could say much in light of what had happened earlier that day. Both of us were still overheated from being forced to run so far and so fast. Perhaps Clint was counting on that, and either way, he wouldn't answer our questions when we asked them. We eventually arrived at my house. I couldn't bring myself to feel shock at the fact that my window was fixed, but I did jump when I saw a couple of people standing in the tree line. That's what you tend to do when you're unaccustomed to seeing people who look like SWAT officers or soldiers. Even investigative journalists find it hard to get used to that if they don't regularly investigate such things as that. At least, we could all relax a bit. I let Nicola borrow a change of clothes, and I got changed myself. And after relieving ourselves, we joined Clint in my living room. "I assume you'll finally tell us what's going on. Am I right? Because Nicola and I would like a few answers." "I figured that would come out of your mouth. How about we start with the Black Bubble Forum, shall we?" My nostrils flared when I saw that my laptop was in his lap, but I didn't have time to say anything about it. Within seconds, it was fully opened up and revealed the forum in a post. It was the one titled, "The Pilgrims called Sophia and Nicola shall open blind eyes." "Both of you, read." And this is what the post said. "You've been given a brief history of tomorrow. Of course, the history is much longer than that. The history of tomorrow starts eons ago, back when the earth was still forming and the progeny of the void still ruled. In fact, the progeny of the void still rule. Few have the good fortune of laying eyes on them. Perhaps you'll find yourself worthy of them. Oh, yes, you shall. There is a clue on where to find the progeny hidden in this post. Hurry, the progeny of the void eagerly awaits you." And that was the end of the post. To say that Nicola and I were bewildered is an understatement to say the least. All we could do was look at Clint. Do we get to have the answers to our questions yet? Nicola demanded. Who are these people and how did they know our names? For that matter, how do you know our names? I asked. Clint chuckled mirthlessly and leaned back in the chair he was sitting in. The dark web isn't as secure as people like to think it is. Even the people with security as good as the kind Sophia has can suffer breaches. At that, I ducked my head. He did have a point. I did have some very good security on my computer, some of the best money can buy. Maybe I should have known. Even the best security money can buy can't guarantee anything. It's something every hacker learns fast. I looked back at Clint and asked, You sniffed around my computer, didn't you? It was more a statement than anything else, but he still nodded. From the moment you found the Black Bubble Forum, though, as we came to find out, we weren't the only ones. Clint then leaned forward and put his hands on his knees, his chin supported by them, and right away I knew he was about to tell us something important. We've known about the progeny of the Void for decades, ever since we learned what happened with the Orang Medan. Heard of it? Nicola and I shook our heads no. It's okay. It's not widely known about, and many people who have heard about it doubt the ship exists in the first place. There's a reason for that. We destroyed many of the records of what happened to the ship. What did happen with it to make that happen? I couldn't help but ask. The SSS Orang Medan was sailing the Straits of Malacca in June of 1947 when it sent out an SOS signal. It started out normally though. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. That was all that came out before the Morse code became indecipherable. The only piece that could be deciphered was the last sentence, which said, I die. The source was triangulated, and then the American ship Silver Star was the first to reach it. The crew sent a rescue team, but there was nobody to rescue, and there was a good reason for that. The entire crew had been turned into a giant pile of dead bodies. Their eyes were wide open in horror, their mouth open in eternal screams, and arms stretched out as if begging for someone to stop. The captain was found the same way as the people found in the wheelhouse and chart room. Not even the dog was spared. Perhaps the most harrowing death was the radio operator, his fingertips still on the telegraph. Wait, so how did they know it was the progeny of the Void? I asked. I didn't even care that I didn't know who or what the progeny of the Void were. The bodies weren't the only things to be found on the ship that day. They also found these papers around the ship. Each one was titled with the same phrase, A Brief History of Tomorrow. Nicola and I immediately stiffened and looked at each other. That was how that note thrown on my window began. Did the papers ever use the word Anthrodynia? I asked. This time, it was Clint's turn to stiffen. How do you know? He hissed out. Nicola made a beeline for her tote bag, and after a bit of rummaging, she yanked out that note that had been attached to that brick. Nice, it's still in my bag. She handed it to Clint, and as soon as he was done reading it, he was pale. "So, that's what was attached to the brick they told me about," he whispered. "It's worse than we thought." He stood up, took a phone, and left the room. Nicola and I couldn't speak in the light of that. Time ticked by so slowly as we waited for something to happen. Another crash jolted us to standing position. It was another brick, which, as I noticed, also had a piece of paper attached to it with rubber bands. Clint ran back in, and he was soon joined by two people dressed in SWAT garb. One of them spoke into a walkie-talkie. "What's the situation outside?" he asked. "3 people, dressed in gray hoodies, have run away from us. We couldn't catch up with them." I let everyone in the room watch as I took the paper off the brick. I read the message on it out loud for everyone to hear. "The pilgrims, named Sophia and Nicola, will seek a distant place. The name of the distant place is called Yestersoul. Let the neophytes find the factory that hides it." Clint yanked the note from my hands. He turned to one of the people dressed in SWAT gear. "Scan that post on the forum with steganography software. We have a trip to take." "We? As in Sophia and I are coming with you?" "Why else would we have ordered your houses secured? It also means we're about to meet people we've been hoping and dreading to encounter for so many years." The post was scanned, and it revealed an image. It was a satellite photo of Mount Denali. Everyone in the room knew that we would need to head there, since there was a big red X located on one side of the mountain. The flight lasted a good 14 hours or so, and from there, we drove from Anchorage to Denali National Park, which took about 5 hours thanks to traffic. And from there, we spent the rest of the day gathering the necessary camping gear. We spent the night in a motel, and early the next morning, we headed into the park. That's where we are right now. We've been hiking for several hours and are getting ready to rest for the night. We haven't had much opportunity to ask about any details about who the progeny of the Void are and what they want, largely because Clint and his officers have been going over their own measures of what they need to do. We've had to prepare ourselves and go over the route we're taking. How on earth did a simple visit to the dark web forum lead to all of this? All I know is that when we get to wherever we're going, I'll need to be prepared for anything. I regret visiting that dark web forum, Part 4. If I thought things were nuts earlier, they've most assuredly gotten that way now. I'm still trying to process what Clint told us and where we are. As for Nicola, well, I don't know how she'll fare. We found the place that was marked on the photo. It took a while. The snow and terrain made it fairly tough to get to as a group, but we eventually got there. When we did get there, we all just stood there in confusion for a moment. "Did we read the map wrong?" Nicola asked. "There's nothing of note here." At first glance, she had a point. It looked like nothing but more rocks and more snow. We all stood there, and the wind biting into our skin. But then, I got a closer look at the rocks closest to my feet. There was snow falling inside of it, and some of the snow I noticed was turning into slush. As far as I know, there's only one reason that would be the case. I lifted up the rock and found that there was a trap door underneath, and it was partially open. Clint lifted the trap door up, and one of the people accompanying us began climbing down. After two more followed suit, Nicholas started climbing down, and I soon did the same, and soon followed by Clint. The climb down was long, and I almost slipped out of sheer exhaustion at one point, but I eventually felt my foot touch something that felt like a floor. My eyes stung for a moment with how bright everything was, but they adjusted soon enough, and I brushed the snow off of my body, and then I looked around. "What is this place?" Nicola muttered. I couldn't blame her for that. I was wondering the same thing. It looked like the concourse of a convention center with how big it was. And I just stood there wondering how it got there, why it was built, and who built it. On the left-hand side, I noticed that there was a map. I made a beeline for it. Clint and Nicola followed close behind and then studied it along with me. It was only then that I realized just how massive a place it actually was. There were so many areas on the map. Some were terminals, others were marked as cafeterias or bathrooms. There were dorm rooms too, though I couldn't figure out what dorm rooms were doing here at that moment. My curiosity about dorm rooms evaporated as soon as I saw the rest of the map. There were other places on the map with names attached to them. I didn't know why they were there, but it still gave me goosebumps despite the fact that I was warming up to the point where I was wondering if I still needed my jacket. Many of the places were labeled as labs. Others were computer labs, and there were large rooms marked as the places where the servers were stored. A couple of the rooms were labeled as panic rooms, and there were 2 rooms labeled as situation rooms. The rooms and the map just went on and on. There were so many of them underneath Mount Denali, and I was struggling to wrap my mind around it. Why would a place with labs, panic rooms, and situation rooms be down here? I then noticed one section on the map. It was called the Sacred Complex. Rooms in that section had names like the Sanctuary of Truthmaker and the Alizea Temple. The sound of my phone made me jump. I stiffened when I opened it up. Not only did this place have a cell phone service, but I had a new text message. "What does it say?" Clint asked, and I opened it up. "Welcome to the city of Retropolis, pilgrim. Make yourself at home." Everyone in the concourse jumped, and their eyes darting around when the lights around us flickered. My phone beeped again, meaning I had another text message, and I opened it up. "Pilgrims do not fear. Old friends wish for orders of salvation." And then, the light stopped flickering and then returned to normal. I looked at Clint, and he couldn't have been paler if he tried. He took a deep breath and turned to the people who had been accompanying us this whole time. "Secure the points of entry and exit," he ordered. "It's high time for me to go give some explanations." The people accompanying us immediately set about obeying Clint's orders. Clint, Nicola, and I then sat down on the floor. This time, I made sure to take off my jacket. Damn straight, he had some explaining to do, and I suspected that it would be a long one. "I didn't think we'd be this close. I didn't think we'd even find Retropolis," he muttered. "Clint, we need you to start at the beginning," I ordered. "You need to explain what the progeny of the Void are, where they came from, why they're here, what they want from us, and what they plan to do." "I'm aware," Clint snorted. "I don't have the answers to all your questions, but I can answer most. Let's back up to where I left off with the Orang Medan, shall we?" I nodded, and that seemed like a good enough place to start. I took a deep breath, as did Nicola. This was going to be something. The notes found all over that ship started with the same words that were thrown through Sophia's window on that break. But unlike that note, the ones on the Orang Medan continued on. "The age of Anthrodynia begins when the children of the blue planet pay the price for war. The joy of the sun will come 10 years later." The people muttering fervent glory sayings. Nicola and I looked at each other and then back at Clint, who then chuckled without a lick of humor on it. I know, it didn't make much sense at that time. The sailors managed to save many of the notes when they left the ship, but the ship itself sank to the bottom of the ocean after an explosion. But then came the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was when we started receiving messages. Clint sighed and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "At least once a month in the months and years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had a message come in. The details in them were scant, but we've managed to get a few. As far as we can tell, the progeny of the Void have existed for billions of years. There are speculations that they're the first sentient species to ever have emerged in the universe. They call their home planet Yestersol. We don't have the slightest clue as to what they look like, but one thing I can say is that the notes slowed down after the Berlin Wall came down and the USSR broke apart. They slowed down from once a month to once every couple of years." "Did they ever pick back up?" I asked. Clint chuckled mirthlessly again. "They began picking back up once a month ever since the events of one certain Tuesday morning in September of 2001. And right away, I knew what he was referring to. Whatever these beings are, one thing is clear. They're watching us, and they respond to us with an increased frequency when we humans become terrible to each other. In fact, I doubt the Orang Medan was the first time they made themselves known to us in some strange way." At that, my heart clenched. That couldn't have been a good thing. "Any suspicions as to when the first one might have been?" Nicola asked. "That's kind of impossible to say, considering how long human history is. The first we've managed to connect to them in recent history was the Tunguska event. Heard of it?" I nodded, but Nicola shook her head no. In 1908, a mysterious explosion happened near the stony Tunguska River in Siberia. There aren't any known human fatalities thanks to how sparsely populated the area was. But here's the strange thing about the official records. No official expedition to the area took place until a decade had passed. "Why not?" Nicola asked. "It was only 6 years before the outbreak of World War I, and later then, a Russian Revolution. At least, that's what the people surmise now. And the best guess that scientists give for what it was is that a meteoroid exploded over the area or an air burst happened. There's a reason for both of those, as the records have largely been purged. That gave me a pause. Didn't Clint just say this was the first event essentially confirmed to be tied to the progeny of the Void? There were records that escaped the records purge. Clint continued before I could say otherwise. One of them was a simple paragraph. The same one that Sophia received through her window. Apparently, it had been in the hands of a local villager not too far from where the Tunguska event happened. It was then passed into the hands of a historian, who kept it hidden, albeit with personal documents detailing the events leading up to the receipt of that note. What did happen? I asked. Apparently, someone knocked on the villager's door late at night. When the villager opened it, there wasn't anyone there, but there was a piece of paper underneath a rock. You can imagine what it said. I ducked my head for a moment and then looked back up at Clint. Have there been any other incidents tied to the progeny? I asked. I already knew that there would be, but I couldn't help myself from asking anyway. The Dyatlov Pass incident is another notable one, Clint said as he nodded. 9 experienced hikers and skiers were found dead in the Ural Mountains. 2 of the bodies were emitting radiation, and 1 of the bodies was found with a tongue missing. Just like with Tunguska and the Orang Medan, a note describing a brief history of tomorrow was found. And just like with Tunguska and the Orang Medan, any mention of the note or a brief history of tomorrow were either erased or classified. Even the highest levels of the governments of such countries as Russia, China, and the United States have no clue about the notes. I took a breath, as did Nicola. This was a lot to take in. Indeed, this entire experience has been a tough one to deal with. Maybe my boss was right, and Nicola and I are schmucks. But as soon as Clint said the last sentence, I paused. Wait, then how did you see it? I asked. For that matter, then how did I see it? Clint was the one to take the deep breath this time. This is where the Black Bubble Forum comes into play. You see, the people I work for aren't a government agency. Rather, we work with a government. We work with many governments for that matter. Our job is to protect the world and the people living in it from the things that governments either can't or won't deal with. But sometimes, things go wrong and threats slip through the cracks. Nicola and I tensed up. I didn't like where this was going, and from the looks of it, neither did she. The Black Bubble Forum is one of the websites operated by the progeny of the Void. It's what they use to find people tired of how terrible people are to each other. It's often hit or miss, as most people who visit it don't have the nerve to reply to any of the posts, but they've still managed to find enough of them. That's how Retropolis came to exist, as far as we can tell. Well, that explains something. Nicola did tell me that she visited the Black Bubble Forum once when she was in college. But as far as I can tell, she never replied to any of the posts. No wonder she was confused as I was. I looked around the concourse and back at the map, and my heart sank. The people accompanying us had guns in their hands, and they also had several magazines of bullets on their bodies. So, what happens now that we're here? I asked as I stood up, making sure to stretch out my legs to wake them up. Clint and Nicola followed suit. Clint opened up his backpack. He reached inside and then handed me and Nicola a handgun, along with a couple of magazines of bullets. We need to contain the threat, and trust me, we have a showdown coming. At that, Nicola started shaking. She quickly glanced around the concourse, her face pale. It was obvious that she had never fired a gun before. Neither have I, for that matter. I don't know if I can do this, but it looks like I don't have much choice in that matter. Update. My heart is pounding out of my chest, and I received another text. It said, "The sacred complex offers respite." I don't think it's meant as a good thing. Well, here's to hoping nothing insane happens. I regret visiting that dark web forum. Final part. It took us an hour and a half to get close to the sacred complex, and I couldn't help but jump a few times. Clint and the others jumped along with me. We heard what we thought was a baby crying a couple of times, only to find that there was nothing there. We pressed on. After all, we had a task ahead of us. The walls of the place seemed to have been staring me down the entire time. I wasn't the only one who felt that way, as Nicola, I noticed, was quickly darting her eyes around as well. She was still pale, and she kept needing to wipe her hands against her pant legs. "You okay?" I asked, and she nodded. "I will be," only for her to wipe her hand against her leg yet again. I continued looking around, my gun securely in my hands. There was no way that I or anyone else would believe her, but that wasn't a priority. We arrived at yet another junction and examined the map that was on the wall near it. After doing so, we started walking down the hall. And out of nowhere, and we gasped as we did it, the walls changed colors. It changed from the white and gray that we had seen throughout the complex up to that point to an iridescent black. It reminded me of the logo on that forum, and yet we could still see just fine. "Stay near me," Clint ordered. Not that he needed to say that. I didn't have any clue as to what else to do. Suddenly, the lights went out. Nicholas screamed, along with a couple of soldiers. I let out a yelp when something crashed next to me. The lights came back on to reveal that the walls were switching between white and gray and iridescent black, and after a moment or two, I looked at the place where I heard the crash. It was yet another brick, with yet another piece of paper attached to it with rubber bands. This time, I wasn't exactly eager to pick it up. I and everyone else just stood there staring at it. Every last one of us was hesitant to so much as touch the damn thing. "Well, go on, pick it up." The voice sounded like how it does when you hear it while you're underwater, except it also sounded like a mother talking to her toddler. But most of all, it didn't sound like it belonged in a place like this. I and everyone else slowly turned around towards the junction that we had just passed through, and we gave a second collective gasp. There were several figures standing in the junction, each of them dressed in what appeared to be gray hoodies and gray sweatpants. Their hoods were hiding their faces, their hands either in their pockets or behind their backs, and from that distance, I couldn't tell which. Welcome, Pilgrim Sophia and Nicola. Make yourselves at home. The people started walking, or rather, marching towards us. Nicola shot at one of them and managed to strike one of them in the neck. I had to force myself to keep from screaming when iridescent black liquid cascaded out of it. Its head keeled to one side and fell off, and then the thing collapsed in a pile on the floor. Barely a second later, one of them charged her, turning into a blur of gray in the process. Nicola squealed in pain as the blur retreated, and blood squirted out of her neck. It dripped quietly onto the floor, and then Nicola collapsed with a thud. Go on, Pilgrim Sophia. Pick up the brick. What do you want from me? I demanded. Pick up the brick. What do you want? One of the things marched right up to me and stopped only 2 or 3 feet away. I swallowed thickly. The progeny of the void. Are you one of them? And the thing removed its hood. I inhaled sharply. It was a human face in form, but all of the colors were inverted. White had become black, pink skin had turned blue, gray eyes were now purple, and black hair was white and gray. I'm glad to meet you, Pilgrim Sophia. Come with me to your new home, Pilgrim. The thing reached for me. I gasped when Clint pulled me behind him. A few of the people with us aimed their guns in the thing's direction. Stay away from her. You have no beef with her. A pilgrim seeks wisdom, child of the blue planet. Why deny a pilgrim wisdom? What the fuck do you want from me? I demanded yet again. By then, the thing sounded more like it was pleading. A pilgrim seeks wisdom. The progeny of the void offer wisdom. Let the progeny give wisdom. The thing attempted to march towards me again. This time, one of the people around us pushed me and Clint out of the way and fired a shot. Stay away from me! I yelled. The thing squealed in a mix of what sounded like a malfunctioning power line transformer and an entire ward of newborn babies screaming at the top of their lungs. It fell to the floor, and black liquid bubbling to the surface. A pilgrim condemns the progeny, it wailed, and then it stopped and sat up. I looked at the other beings and gasped along with everyone else. The remaining figures had removed their hoods as well. Their faces were also inverted in color, and the contrast between the colors was much sharper, and their eyes bored into me. A pilgrim condemns the progeny, they all yelled together. I jumped when I heard gurgling. I looked in the direction of Nicola's body, whose blood had by now pooled into a massive puddle. Blood bubbled out of Nicola's gaping neck wound. It was already turning an iridescent black, and she was paler than she already was. Then, her body started seizing. It was slow at first, and only involved her limbs. But then her chest and torso started lifting off the floor. The seizing picked up speed and soon came to be so fast it looked like a grand mal seizure that most people associate with epilepsy. And then, she stopped, her back collapsing on the ground. A few moments passed and everyone stared at Nicola as we waited for what would happen next. And I jumped when I saw a movement that looked like she had opened her eyes. And then Nicola sat up. Her skin and face were all the indication we needed. All the colors of her face, hair, and eyes that we were all used to had been inverted. A pilgrim condemns the progeny, she wailed. Then, All of the beings along with Nicola charged us. I fired my gun so many times, as did Clint, along with the people who had been accompanying the entire time. Damn it! The noise was deafening, and not just from the guns. The things coming at us kept screaming that inhuman wail, which we heard over all the shooting. "A pilgrim condemns the progeny!" they kept screaming. I fired my gun over and over. I don't know how, but I managed to hit at least one of the beings every single time. But few of the shots did anything to slow them down, let alone stop them. Finally, one of them hit one of the things in the neck, and as soon as that happened, the things had their heads fall off and they all collapsed, never to move again. Clint and I looked at each other. That was all the hint either of us needed as to where to aim. "Aim for the necks!" Clint shouted. Their heads started flying off and their bodies collapsing. I have no clue as to how many of my bullets did that. I like to think that every one of them did, but I doubt it. Either way, Clint grabbed my arm and yanked me along. "What's going on?" I asked. "Keep quiet, we need to get out of here." "What about the others?" "They're trained to give their lives. Just keep going." "Why are we leaving?" "I just got orders over my radio. We have backup in the complex. They just told us more of those things coming." "So, what does that mean?" "We need to secure the place." Secure the place? What in the world did that mean? How could a place this big even be secured? There were terminals, computer labs, and too many tunnels to count. It didn't help that I was becoming dizzy, and it appeared Clint was becoming dizzy as well. A voice came over Clint's radio. "Agent Clint, we've got your message. We found the terminals." "Excellent. Sophia and I are on the way," he answered. We kept running and ducking in and out of the place. I noticed the hall leading to the sacred complex. "We're not going that way, Sophia. It was a ruse the entire time." Despite my heavy breathing and racing heart, I gasped. I didn't need to be told what he was talking about. More of those things had to have been down there. "A pilgrim condemns the progeny!" Clint shot behind us, and both of us heard the head get blown off, and we kept running. The halls kept winding and winding, and Clint had to keep shooting. My bags almost fell away from my body a couple of times, but I managed to hold on to them. Then I slipped again, only to see a couple of those things at the other end of the hall. "A pilgrim condemns the progeny!" they wailed, and then they started charging at us. I tried shooting, only to find that I had run out of bullets. I look around. "Where's the exit?" I whimpered, as I saw none. "There!" Clint pointed at a trap door. He yanked it open and shoved me through. He shot at the things, heads flying, and then he came through the trap door and slammed it behind him. And then everything was silent. We looked around and saw another map. After examining it, we realized that we were near one of the terminals. "Agent Clint, state your location," a voice asked over his radio. "Approaching Terminal 412. Sophia Bonaparte is with me." "Excellent job, Clint. We have people at that terminal." And then we immediately started marching ourselves down there. And as soon as we did, I went still when I saw what was there. "Hands up! Don't move!" A couple of people standing there yelled, their guns pointed in my direction and their voices booming. Not one to argue with that, I did as I was told. Clint told them who I was and what happened in the rest of the complex. Clint kept going on and on with the details, seeing as I was in no condition to say anything. I was still too focused on the adrenaline rush I was coming off of. That and the logo on the clothing that the people who rescued us were wearing. It looked like a circle with 3 arrows pointing towards the center. "A pilgrim condemns the progeny. Aim for their necks, have their heads fly off," Clint ordered. The soldiers did, and then succeeded in doing so. Many of them had to catch their breath after that. "Is that what you and Clint were dealing with this whole time?" one of them asked. Still unable to speak, I nodded. "Yikes, that's creepy. Let's get the 2 of you out of here." I nodded again as the trains came. A couple of teams stayed behind to secure the place, but I and a couple of other teams were on our way out. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of that. "What do you propose we do with her now?" Clint asked. "We still need to debrief her about all of this." "Let Sophia rest first. It's a rather sudden introduction to the anomalous." "Any idea where we're going?" I asked. "Our headquarters in Washington, D.C., Clint said. "You did well. Most people in your position struggle with making sense of the progeny of the void. Most people also don't get involved in containment," one of the others around us pointed out. "You excelled when you were introduced to it as well." At that, Clint chuckled. "What happens to the complex I was in?" I asked. "That's for HQ to decide once we've neutralized the progeny that infested it." And with that, I was basically ordered to get some rest and relaxation. We made it back to Anchorage, where we bought our tickets to Washington, D.C. We've been waiting for the flight for a while, but it gave me a chance to type all of this up. I'll have to wait until we've gotten to their headquarters before I'm debriefed. I have no idea what these people are going to tell me. But if there's one thing that I can say, it's this. Something tells me I was wrong to regret stumbling on that dark web forum. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.